Our guest today is Dr. Maziki Thame, professor at the University of the West Indies and Mona campus in Jamaica. And welcome again to Caribbeana, Maziki.
Thank you, Bon. Let me just set the record straight. I'm not yet professor. So here we only use the title when we are so recognized, and I haven't gotten there yet.
Oh, well, I recognize you to be that, you know.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, in these days, politics ruling, and we're seeing all kinds of things. The Caribbean is now attracted in the whole process, you know. But tell us, how are things in Jamaica at the moment? Yes, yeah. Are
Well,
you?
currently we are in election mode. This year is, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that elections are constitutionally due in September in
Uh-huh.
Jamaica. So the parties, no election date has been called as yet, but
Mhm.
you'd know that in our system, we don't have a set date. The elections are called largely by the Prime Minister, um, but within the 5-year period. So
Right,
it's due, and the parties seem to be readying themselves.
right. But in general, what is some of the problems Jamaica still seems to have? Is crime still a problem, or is economics still a problem?
The the crime situation has taken an interesting turn. I would say the government is reporting reduced crime, but we are also seeing an increase in police killings. Um, a couple of weeks ago, one of the human rights groups, Jamaicans for Justice, raised concerns about the rate of killing by the police. At 56 days into the year, we were
Mhm.
at 56 police killings. It has gone down a little bit since then, um, but it certainly is, from my standpoint, alarming if it is to indicate to us that that is the way that we intend to manage the high violence in the society. It
Mhm.
would suggest that we are thinking along the lines of what is happening in El Salvador. A militarized approach is what it suggests.
Yeah,
There were indications of that before the increase in police killings, which actually started last year.
yeah.
Indications, for example, in the establishment of joint military and police posts in communities that were deemed, high crime communities.
Mhm.
So we saw, and in fact, the government promised us that that is what they would do in their 2016 manifesto. The Jamaica Labour Party indicated that they would have been approaching crime in that way. So there are no surprises there.
Right.
But what we have not seen is any kind of strong mobilization against the approach.
Oh. And that mobilization be coming from the people or the opposition, or what?
Well, whether the people or the opposition, and of course, we would hope that the opposition is representing the people, but neither. The opposition has been saying pretty consistently that they would take more of a social intervention approach to crime management. But we haven't heard any real strong outcry as it relates to the increase in police killing.
Right. Now, the situation in a global sense, maybe a US vis-a-vis the region. Recently, President Trump, in his adoption of new policies, have indicated dealing with the Caribbean in a particular way. His Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, indicated, who, by the way, comes out of the Cuban heritage, uh, um, has propagated a situation that if any of the Caribbean countries receive aid, health aid from Cuba, there will be some impact. What is that doing in the region?
So I haven't seen an articulated response from the Jamaican government, but I know that in the case of Grenada and St. Vincent, they have declared that they will maintain their programs and that they are not, as the US is indicating, involved in any forms of human trafficking. They do not see the Cuban health foreign policy initiatives as human trafficking, which is how the US government has been articulating a view of it.
Yeah,
We have long had, relations of solidarity with Cuba at points higher than others. We all know that the Cuban health programs are important to their foreign policy, to maintaining relations, good relations in the region,
yeah,
and that we are beneficiaries of it insofar as, given our poverty, our health system is often strained, and it would not be in our interests. And by that I mean it would not be in the interest of the people who benefit from these programs to diminish them in any way.
yeah.
Um, Certainly, we haven't received any, as far as I am aware, any indication from the US government that they would provide an alternative to these programs for the region. So essentially, what it is doing is reinforcing the impoverishment of Caribbean people by suggesting that we will face further punishment if we maintain these programs.
I mean, what, in your opinion, has the Caribbean leadership come out with any statement of bonding together or anything like that?
Well, I am not aware of it, but I would say that the CARICOM meeting is coming up shortly or soon, I should say,
Mhm.
in Jamaica.
Yeah,
And I imagine that it will be one of the issues that are on the agenda for discussion. It is always in our best interest to approach these matters as a region, because as small states, and certainly we have a history of doing that in our foreign policy,
yeah,
but as small states in the Caribbean that have had a long history with the US, sometimes relations good, other times there is conflict. Um, we would have to, I think it's in our best interest to approach these matters as a region.
right, right.
And
I get.
not just CARICOM, but also to pay attention to the ways in which countries across Latin America have been responding to the specific threats that they are receiving in this era of American government.
Right, right, right. I mean, this is quite a strange era. How would you describe it?
Mhm. That's a difficult thing to do. I mean, it's an era of uncertainty. I don't think we are clear as yet what the intentions of the US government are. There's certainly an indication that it is thinking of itself in terms of developing new alliances. So old alliances don't look as stable. When we think about relations within NATO, for example, when we think
Mhm.
about relations within the North American region, Canada, the United States, it is unclear to me what the aims of the US government are in terms of the maintenance of their traditional alliances and the development of new ones, and how it imagines world power to look.
Right,
Um, Trump is defining American interests in a kind of unipolar fashion. And the question of whether it will be successful in being able to, impress upon the world a vision of global power where the United States is the only power in town. I think we're past that. Um, Again, I would say I am not quite clear how it is that the US imagines that it will manage its historical friendships,
mhm,
considering the conflict that is existing currently
Right.
and what it hopes to gain from this particular shift.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the Jamaican its diaspora? Any reactions from them?
Well, you are in the diaspora, Von, so you might have a better pulse, a better, finger on on what's happening in the diaspora than I. But that is, I've not heard any statements from Jamaican diaspora, from groups of Jamaican diaspora in terms of
Right.
how they want our government
Yeah.
to respond.
Yeah. Same here. That's why I asked you, because sometimes the interaction takes place um, outside of the ultra areas. Well, what do you see? I mean, what do you perceive will be happening, especially for the young Caribbean, the young Jamaican? I mean, what do you find on their minds? Are they talking? Are they? Do you get a feel for any of
Well,
that?
I can only really speak to my students, and certainly they are paying attention. Trump has caused a stir everywhere in the world, I think,
Yeah.
and they are paying attention. I teach students in political science, and so they would have an awareness of the implications of American politics. In fact, they might even be more interested in American politics than they are in local
Right.
politics. They are a bit confused, I would say, about the meaning of it. They don't have too much historical context, wouldn't necessarily fully appreciate the long arc of American imperialism. So they're trying to grapple with understanding what it all means. But I think one of the things that is clear to me, at least, is that the US is a standard setter for the region. And what the US government is able to get away with in terms of, power grabs in a case where we might have believed that the presidential model offered some, you know, uh, certitudes in relation to the separation of powers, whereas we have been going through a process of reviewing our own constitutional mechanisms, in particular in relation to the status of the British Crown in the
Mhm.
Caribbean. You would know that a few years ago, the Barbadian government let go of that. The Jamaican
Right.
government has said that it is committed to removing the crown as the head of state,
Right.
but the report of that committee has been very conservative as it relates to what it sees as the way forward. So we haven't seen any measures put forward that would really deepen the democracy here.
Mhm.
And at the same time, why raise the issue of the standards that would be set by the United States? We know that in politics, there is always the danger that, authoritarian tendencies can show themselves. And in the Caribbean, politics within these small societies has carried over colonial understandings of power, which sometimes look authoritarian.
Right.
So politicians might be enamored by the ways in which power grabs occur in the United States, and not just politicians, because this is also about corporate power.
Right. Right.
And therefore, we would want to think about how our indigenous private sectors think about whether they value democracy or whether they think about democracy in terms of their capitalist interests and whether they can advance those interests, looking at the United States as a model for how to do politics. So we should be alert, and we should be very careful in making decisions about how we pressure our own governments. I would say that levels of organization are pretty low
Yeah.
in Jamaica today. Um, so I'm not expecting that we'll have any movement to seriously hold our governments to account. Um, so there is some, concern there for me as a political scientist about the
Yeah.
future and what the future looks like. And I think that we would want to think about that in terms of the entire Caribbean region. Of course, immigration is an issue that has been important to us. We've been on the move since the end of slavery.
Yeah.
Caribbean people were involved in building the Panama Canal, in railways, in Peru, in you know, servicing needs of Britain in the Windrush period, in farm work programs in the United States,
Yes.
In North America generally. So certainly, when immigration policies appear hostile, it would concern us. And what we are seeing from the US is that they also intend to use remittance mechanisms to track the movement of people in the United States. We are
Okay.
heavily dependent on remittances. Obviously, not all our people are documented.
Right.
In the last few years, we saw an uptick of movement of people across the Mexico border, Jamaicans specifically.
Yeah.
And well, but when we face the prospect of people being returned, that is of concern to us in in terms of economics. But you know, in the case of Jamaica, it is indicative of something else. And I would say the ways in which the global right, the rise of the global right, also plays out
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
along a militarized line when the prospect of increased returns, because returns always happen, right?
Mhm.
But when the prospect of increased returns was raised in Jamaica, our government issued a warning. The prime minister told people that, they should not think that they would be able to come here and commit crimes, and that they will either meet their judge or their maker,
Right. Right.
um, if they were to come to Jamaica and misbehave. And that is really indicative of the kind of, um, you know, a sort of contempt for Jamaicans,
Right.
um, rather than a sense that it is a duty of the state to protect its citizens. Um, we instead issued a warning to our citizens.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess it's just going to take us a little time to see where things go. And I hope it all goes pervasive for us in a progressive fashion. And
Well, that may take its own time to develop. In that, the unfortunate reality is that sometimes, we have to be in a state of historical decline in order for the progressive elements to organize
yeah,
and you know
yeah, yeah, yeah,
serve as a front against the direction of politics.
yeah, yeah. I have often said in these times, where is a Michael Manley? I mean, where is a Maurice Bishop? I mean, the names, those characters, those individuals no longer exist, of course. But the transplant or the continuance of individuals of such characters do no longer exist.
Well, I mean, I think I've said this on your program before,
Yeah,
Vaughn. So just to repeat it, and sorry, I don't have any other answers, but certainly the fact of the absence of those sorts of figures, it has to be seen both in terms of the defeat of the left um, by 1983 with the invasion of Grenada, but
right.
also the consolidation of neoliberalism. And in the period of neoliberalism, the rise of the technocratic, bureaucratic politician.
Yeah,
We're still in that phase. Some scholars would argue that the neoliberal order is dying, but in the Caribbean, I wouldn't say that. I think the order is still in place.
right.
And in that sense, um, that kind of radical thinker is not necessarily on the political stage.
Yeah, yep, yes, yes, yes. Dr. Maziki Thame, thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you, man. And I hope Next time we,
Okay, good to talk to you,
yeah,
Vaughn.
yeah. All right, well, you take care.
All
I've been,
right.
all
You
right,
take care as well.
right. I've been speaking with Dr. Maziki Thame, a professor at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus in Jamaica. This is Vaughn Martin. Caribbeana continues.